Number 1. Shanda Vander Ark. In July 2022, police in Norton Shores, Michigan, walked into a quiet suburban home on what seemed like a routine welfare check. What they found was a scene of horror. On the floor lay 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson, disabled, frail, and already gone. The boy weighed just 69 pounds. His death, the medical examiner later ruled, was caused by starvation and hypothermia. Prosecutors would later describe what Timothy endured as a campaign of torture. The words weren't chosen lightly. Step by step, jurors heard how his own mother, Shanda Vander Ark, systematically stripped him of food, warmth, and dignity. Cabinets and refrigerators in the home were locked so Timothy couldn't sneak food. Nights were sleepless, his rest broken. Punishments were cruel and inventive. Ice baths that left him trembling, and spoonfuls of one of the world's hottest hot sauces forced down his throat. This wasn't neglect. It was deliberate. The case moved swiftly through the Michigan courts. After her arrest, Vander Ark was found competent to stand trial. By late 2023, she stood before a Muskegon County jury facing charges of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse. In their opening statements, prosecutors told the jurors that Timothy had been treated very differently from anyone else in that house. They laid out a chilling roadmap of deprivation and abuse. The most haunting evidence came not just from experts, but from Vander Ark's own family. Her older son, Paul, had testified against her. Jurors were shown text messages where mother and son discussed punishments, even questioning whether to put hot sauce on Timothy's genitals. There was no accident here, no lapse of judgment. There was knowledge. There was intent. As the trial progressed, medical experts described how starvation eats away at the human body and how cold exposure worsens the decline. Detectives spoke of a closet under the stairs where Timothy had been forced to sleep, sometimes on nothing but a tarp. In one video, too disturbing even for the jury to watch in full, Timothy's emaciated body is dragged by his arms, bones jutting through his skin, reduced to wearing only a diaper. The defense tried to argue that Vander Ark was overwhelmed. They said she struggled with mental health issues, that she misunderstood Timothy's refusal to eat, believing he was on a hunger strike. But the evidence told another story of a mother who knew exactly what she was doing. After less than 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Vander Ark was convicted of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse. At sentencing in January 2024, Judge Matthew Cakshall went beyond the sentencing guidelines, calling her crimes intentional and systematic torture. He sentenced her to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 50 to 100 years. Timothy's brothers gave victim impact statements that cut through the courtroom silence. His brother Nolan told the judge, "If I can't have my brother back, she shouldn't have her freedom back." Those words hung in the air, a reminder of the life stolen and the scars left behind. The court didn't stop with Shanda. Paul Ferguson, the older son who had taken part in Timothy's abuse, also faced justice. He pleaded guilty to first-degree child abuse and was sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison. Even after sentencing, Vander Ark's attorneys sought relief, arguing about competency and fairness. But in 2025, her request for a new trial was denied. The conviction in the life without parole sentence stands. The story of Timothy Ferguson is one of the darkest in Michigan's history. It's a story of a child who relied on his mother for protection, only to be betrayed in the worst possible way. And it forces us to ask a question that echoes long after the courtroom closed. How could the person meant to love and protect him become the architect of his suffering? Cases like this are almost impossible to comprehend. We expect cruelty from strangers, but when it comes from a mother, the very person meant to protect and nurture, the betrayal cuts deeper than words can express. Timothy's life was brief, but the suffering he endured forces us to confront the darkest edges of human behavior. The courtroom brought justice, but justice doesn't bring him back. What it does do is leave us with questions about how neighbors, family, and systems missed the signs, and about what more could be done to prevent children like Timothy from slipping through the cracks. Perhaps the hardest part of telling stories like this is remembering that behind every headline is a child who wanted nothing more than love and care. For Timothy, that love never came, and that absence is what makes this case so haunting. Number 2, Roconda Singleton. In the early hours of January 25th, 2025, a house fire ripped through a Grand Rapids home on Eastern Avenue. Inside, 3 young sisters, aged 7, 10, and 12, were asleep. The blaze would claim the life of the eldest 12-year-old Shamia Stewart and leave the other 2 badly injured, but this was no accident. Investigators quickly determined the fire had been deliberately set by their mother, Roconda Singleton. The evidence of intent was chilling. 7 smoke detectors had been removed from the home and stuffed into a pillowcase outside. Singleton then poured lighter fluid in the upstairs bathroom, lit a living room couch, and allowed the flames to spread, all while her children slept inside. She later admitted to police that she timed the ignition for the early morning hours when the girls would most likely be asleep. When first responders arrived, Singleton was outside the house. The screams of her children came from within. Firefighters managed to pull the girls out, but Shamia could not be saved. She died 2 days later in the hospital. Her younger sister survived, but with significant injuries. In interviews with detectives, Singleton first denied responsibility, but later confessed. She told police, "I am not going to sit here and play like I am the victim." She explained that she believed death had come over her and that she intended to die with her 3 daughters so they could all be free. Singleton described struggling with severe mental health issues in the months leading up to the fire, including paranoia, hallucinations, and delusional thinking. The legal process began immediately. She was arrested and charged with arson, 3 counts of child abuse, and later felony murder after Shamia's death. Bond was set at $500,000. In February 2025, a judge ordered a competency evaluation to determine if Singleton could understand the court proceedings. By mid-year, she was found incompetent to stand trial and placed into treatment, with the court revisiting her case regularly to determine if competency could be restored. Court documents also revealed troubling background details. Records from Child Protective Services showed that concerns had been raised months earlier. Singleton had been involuntarily hospitalized in 2024, but her case was eventually closed when it was believed her children were safe. In hindsight, this decision drew sharp criticism, given what later occurred. In the courtroom, a not guilty plea was entered on her behalf, but prosecutors made clear they would pursue justice aggressively. They argued that removing alarms, pouring lighter fluid, and setting fires with children inside demonstrated premeditation. For a conviction, they will need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt not only that Singleton started the fire, but that she acted with intent. The mental state required for charges like first-degree arson and felony murder. This case raises agonizing questions. Was it cold-blooded cruelty, or the tragic collapse of a woman's mind? For Shamia and her sisters, the answer changes nothing. They face the unimaginable, betrayal by the very person meant to protect them. And the legal system must now decide what justice looks like when mental illness collides with deliberate deadly actions. The fire that claimed young Shamia's life wasn't just a tragedy of flames, but of choices. Stripped smoke detectors, the calculated spread of accelerant, and children left defenseless. Each detail paints a picture of intent that is hard to reconcile with the role of a mother. Yet beneath the criminal charges lies another reality: untreated illness, ignored warning signs, and a system that failed to intervene in time. Whether the courts ultimately frame Singleton's actions as calculated murder or the result of a fractured mind, the outcome is the same. A family destroyed, a community scarred, and 2 surviving children left to carry unimaginable scars. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. How do we weigh accountability against mental collapse? How many red flags can go unanswered before irreversible harm takes place? And what protections should be in place so that children do not become collateral damage in a parent's descent? In the end, the smoke cleared, but the questions it left behind linger still, heavy and unresolved. Number 3, Mitchell Blair. In the spring of 2015, Detroit police stumbled onto a horror that had laid hidden for years. Bailiffs were carrying out an eviction at an apartment complex when they opened a deep freezer and discovered the body of Stoney Blair, 13 years old. Alongside her was the body of her younger brother, Stephen Barry, age 9. They had been dead for months, or possibly longer, and their bodies had been stored in a freezer in their own home. The 2 children were part of Mitchell Blair's family of 6. Blair had 4 children remaining alive at the time of their discovery. For years, neighbors, schools, and even child protection agencies had missed or overlooked the signs of abuse. Those signs included malnourishment, burns, bruises, and frequent isolation. The children were homeschooled, which meant fewer external eyes on their welfare. Court documents reveal that Blair eventually pleaded guilty in Wayne County Circuit Court to 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing Stoney and Stephen. She admitted to killing Stoney deliberately. Regarding Stephen, she claimed it was accidental, but did not contest her guilt for allowing his death and for concealing the body. Blair also asserted in her plea that she believed both had sexually abused a younger sibling, an allegation the prosecution questioned and for which there was no corroborating forensic evidence. During the protective hearing that followed, attorneys from Michigan's Department of Health and Human Services moved to terminate Blair's parental rights for her surviving children. The fathers of Stoney and Stephen also came under legal scrutiny. Prosecutors argued that over many years, 2 separate CPS referrals had reported the children were being mistreated, yet nothing resolved the underlying danger. Evidence showed Blair had burned, beaten, even poured hot water on her children. She had hidden their suffering by dressing them in long sleeves or pants to cover injuries. Ancillary legal proceedings included testimony from the surviving children. One son described physical abuse and neglect. Photos from the apartment, evidence exhibits, showed filthy living conditions, lack of proper bedding, and the freezer in which the bodies were found, heavily in use despite obvious signs of decay. In court, she made emotional outbursts. At one hearing, she screamed, "Yes, I did kill her," when confronted with loss of custody for her remaining children. Sentencing took place in July 2015. Judge Dana Hathaway imposed life in prison without parole. The judge emphasized that Blair's actions went beyond simple neglect. This was calculated cruelty, concealment, and betrayal. The community, the court, and the victim impact statements all acknowledged that nothing could restore the lives of Stoney or Stephen, but that justice required the full weight of the law. In this case, pierces deeper than many because it combines multiple levels of betrayal. The inability for a child to call for help, isolation through homeschooling, concealment of bodies, and delayed discovery. It is a turning point in the narrative, the moment where horror evolves from mere one-on-one abuse into long-concealed atrocity. The discovery inside the Detroit freezer shocked not only the city, but the nation. It wasn't just that 2 children had been murdered. It was that their deaths had been hidden in plain sight, covered by years of silence, missed opportunities, and systemic failure. Mitchell Blair's own words in court, her outbursts, her chilling admissions, left no doubt about her responsibility. Yet they also raised troubling questions about the oversight of vulnerable children, about how warning signs were dismissed, and about why no one intervened before it was too late. Stoney and Stephen's lives were cut short, their suffering concealed behind a locked freezer door. And while Blair will never leave prison, the pain lingers in the surviving siblings, in the community, and in anyone who asks how such horrors could exist undetected for so long. In cases like this, justice may be served, but closure is impossible. The freezer stands as a symbol of secrets no child should ever be forced to carry. Number 4, Azuradee, France. In June of 2022, police in Detroit arrived at a home on the city's west side for a welfare check. What they discovered in the basement freezer was every parent's nightmare and every investigator's horror. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was the body of 3-year-old Chase Allen. The medical examiner would later determine that he had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The investigation revealed that Chase had suffered severe abuse in the days before his death. His mother, Azuradee, France, admitted that she had kicked him in the chest when he refused food. When he was found unresponsive the next morning, she placed his body in a bag and hid it inside the freezer. It would be weeks before authorities uncovered what had happened. Prosecutors charged France with multiple felonies, including felony murder, torture, first-degree child abuse, and concealing a death. But this was not the first time authorities had been involved. Court records and state documents showed that Child Protective Services had opened investigations into France several times between 2017 and 2020. Allegations included neglect, improper supervision, and physical abuse. Some of her children were removed temporarily and later returned. By July of 2024, France faced trial. Instead of risking a jury verdict on the most serious charges, she accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and the other counts were dismissed. Judge Tracy Green sentenced her to 35 to 60 years in prison, calling the case one of the most heartbreaking to come before the court. Legally, the case followed the expected stages. There was an arraignment, a period of discovery where evidence such as the autopsy report and CPS history was presented, and then the plea hearing. Because of the guilty plea, there was no lengthy trial. But during sentencing, prosecutors emphasized Chase's vulnerability, the history of warnings, and the disturbing fact that his body had been hidden in a freezer. The story of Azuradee, France is a chilling echo of the Mitchell Blair case, but on a smaller scale. One child, one act of cruelty concealed in silence until the truth was forced into the open. It reminds us of how fragile oversight can be and how a single decision to act or not to act can mean the difference between protection and tragedy. Chase's story is quieter than some of the others, but it cuts just as deeply. One small boy silenced by violence, hidden away in a freezer while the world outside carried on as if nothing had happened. This case forces us to confront the gaps in a system meant to protect children. Investigations were opened, reports were filed, but somehow the danger remained. By the time anyone returned, it was far too late. The freezer in that basement wasn't just a hiding place. It became a symbol of secrecy, of failure, and of how easily a child's suffering can vanish from view. And while the court sentence ensures accountability, it does not bring justice in its truest sense, because justice would have meant Chase growing up safe, loved, and alive. Number 5, Tatiana Fusari. In August of 2018, authorities in Kent County, Michigan, were called to a home in Solon Township. Inside, they found the body of a 10-month-old baby girl named Mary Welch. She weighed only about 8 pounds, barely more than her birth weight. The medical examiner determined that Mary had died from malnutrition and dehydration. Her parents, Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari, admitted that they had not sought medical help, even though they saw their daughter growing weaker by the day. Investigators learned that the couple claimed religious reasons and deep distrust of doctors. They feared that if they brought Mary to a physician, Child Protective Services might remove their children, so instead, they chose to do nothing. When deputies described Mary's condition, the details were heartbreaking. Her eyes and cheeks were sunken, her bones visible beneath her skin. She appeared cold and frail, the clear signs of long-term neglect. Experts testified that she had been deprived of basic care for weeks, possibly months. Both parents were arrested and charged with felony murder and first-degree child abuse. At their arraignment, the courtroom saw two very different reactions. Fusari broke down in tears as the charges were read. Welch appeared stunned and angry, shaking his head in disbelief. During the trial, prosecutors presented medical testimony showing how Mary's organs had shut down from prolonged starvation. They explained how malnutrition had shrunk her thymus gland, weakened her bone marrow, and left her body unable to fight for survival. They also highlighted how neighbors and family members had expressed concerns about Mary's health before her death, warnings that went unanswered. Fusari's defense argued that she lived under Welch's control, describing emotional and physical abuse. She claimed she felt powerless to act, but the court found that she still shared responsibility. She knew Mary was deteriorating and failed to seek medical care. In 2020, both Welch and Fusari were convicted of first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Fusari received an additional sentence of 15 to 30 years for first-degree child abuse. This case does not involve torture or sudden violence, but its horror lies in slow, preventable neglect. A baby girl starved to death not because resources were unavailable, but because of decisions rooted in ideology, fear, and refusal to seek help. Mary's life could have been saved, and that truth makes the story all the more devastating. Mary's death was not marked by violence in the traditional sense. There were no flames, no weapons, no dramatic struggle. Instead, it was a slow, invisible unraveling, day after day of hunger, dehydration, and silence. What makes this case so haunting is that her suffering could have been stopped at any moment, yet it wasn't. This is a story of belief hardened into negligence, of fear triumphing over compassion, and of systems unable to intervene before the point of no return. Mary's life was short, but her death speaks volumes about the dangers of ideology when it blinds people to a child's most basic needs. Number 6, Amanda Maison. In February of 2018, emergency responders were called to a Port Huron Township home where 3-year-old Matthew Maison had died. At first, his death seemed suspicious, but not fully understood. Years would pass before investigators pieced together the scope of what happened inside that house. What they uncovered was not just neglect, but years of brutal abuse, and a chilling motive that prosecutors say goes beyond cruelty into something calculated. By April 2025, after a lengthy investigation, Matthew's mother, Amanda Maison, now 33, and her then boyfriend, Maurice Houle, 28, were finally charged with first-degree murder. Both were arraigned in St. Clair County District Court. They stood silent as prosecutors laid out the charges, and both entered not guilty pleas. A judge denied bond, citing the seriousness of the allegations and the weight of the evidence. Court records describe a disturbing timeline of abuse that stretched across Matthew's short life. Prosecutors allege that Amanda and Maurice repeatedly banged Matthew's head against drywall, sometimes leaving visible dents in the walls. They forced him into stress positions, kneeling for long periods of time as punishment. They allegedly locked him in a room for hours, sometimes days, depriving him of food and water. Testimony also suggests Matthew was smothered with a pillow, sometimes playfully, sometimes as punishment. One witness claimed that Amanda herself had once pinned the boy down and pressed a pillow over his face. In one of the most haunting allegations, investigators say Amanda and Maurice decided together that Matthew had to be eliminated to make room for another baby, a child's life treated as expendable. An autopsy report released in 2021, after years of forensic review, concluded that Matthew's death was a homicide. The medical examiner cited blunt force trauma and possible mechanical asphyxiation. Matthew's small body showed bruises, impact wounds, and injuries consistent with suffocation. The cause of death aligned with what prosecutors would later argue, that Matthew was beaten, smothered, and denied the most basic needs. Investigators also accuse Amanda Maison of actively covering up the abuse. According to testimony, she canceled doctor's appointments out of fear that physicians would recognize the injuries. She allegedly lied to Child Protective Services and provided misleading accounts of how Matthew was hurt. CPS had been in contact with the family, but Amanda's deception allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. The procedural steps in this case highlight just how slowly justice sometimes moves. Matthew's death in 2018 raised concerns immediately, but evidence was sparse. Only after multiple forensic reviews, witness interviews, and fresh testimony in later years did prosecutors feel they had enough to bring charges. In April 2025, at the arraignment, the court reviewed the evidence, including the autopsy, testimony from relatives, and years of documented concerns, and found probable cause to proceed. The case is now moving toward a preliminary examination, where prosecutors must show enough evidence to bind the defendants over to circuit court for a full trial. These hearings are often described as mini trials, and in this case, they will likely feature medical testimony, CPS records, and possibly family witnesses who saw signs of abuse. For the community, the allegations are almost impossible to process. The thought that a child's life could be ended not out of impulse or rage, but to clear the way for another baby is deeply disturbing. For the court, the challenge now is to determine whether Amanda and Maurice are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and whether the chilling motive prosecutors describe can be proved. What makes this case especially gripping for viewers is that it's still unfolding. Unlike crimes of the past that have reached their verdicts, this one is alive in the courts. Each new filing, each witness statement, each hearing brings more clarity to how Matthew lived and how he died. It's a story of delayed justice, systemic failures, and an alleged motive that still leaves people shaking their heads in disbelief. Matthew's death shows how cruelty can stretch over years and end with a motive almost too cold to believe: a child's life taken to make space for another. Number 7, Marshella Chidester. In April of 2024, the Swan Boat Club in Berlin Township, Michigan, was alive with celebration. A children's birthday party filled the pavilion with decorations, balloons, and the joyful noise of kids laughing, while families gathered to relax by the waterfront. Among the children, there were 8-year-old Alana Phillips and her younger brother Zane, just 4 years old. For their parents, it was supposed to be a safe and happy day. That same afternoon, 67-year-old Marshella Chidester, a longtime member and former commodore of the very same boat club, got behind the wheel of her SUV. Toxicology tests later showed her blood alcohol level at 0.18, more than double the legal limit. Surveillance footage revealed her car speeding down the road at 44 miles per hour before it careened out of control and smashed directly into the pavilion where the party was underway. The impact was catastrophic. The SUV plowed nearly 25 feet into the structure, crushing tables and scattering debris in every direction. Alana and Zane were killed instantly. 15 others, both children and adults, were injured, some with broken bones, some with head trauma, others left with permanent scars. Survivors describe scenes of chaos and terror, beams collapsing, glass shattering, children screaming, parents clawing through the wreckage to reach their kids. First responders said it was one of the most heartbreaking scenes they had ever witnessed. When police arrived, they noted that Chidester smelled strongly of alcohol. Her eyes were bloodshot, her speech slurred, and she had difficulty standing upright. She was taken into custody, and a blood draw conducted hours later confirmed her high level of intoxication. Investigators also recovered bar receipts and empty wine bottles from her home and vehicle, confirming she had been drinking heavily earlier that day. Prosecutors charged Chidester with second-degree murder, 2 counts of operating while intoxicated causing death, and multiple counts of operating while intoxicated causing serious injury. Over the course of the trial, the state called 27 witnesses, including crash survivors, medical experts, toxicologists, and deputies who had administered her sobriety tests. They built the case that this was not an accident, but the predictable result of reckless, intoxicated driving. Her defense attempted to cast doubt. They argued that Chidester suffered from neuropathy, a condition affecting her legs and feet, which may have caused her to mistakenly press the accelerator instead of the brake. They also questioned the integrity of the blood samples, suggesting the preservatives in the vials might not have been properly mixed, and that fermentation could have artificially elevated her alcohol reading. But the evidence, eyewitness testimony, video footage, and the sheer destruction caused outweighed those arguments. On March 6th, 2025, after just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The combination of intoxication, speed, and devastation left little room for reasonable doubt. The sentencing hearing on May 15th, 2025, brought a courtroom filled with grief and anger. Mariah Dodds, the mother of Alana and Zane, told the judge her world had ended that day. She spoke of the laughter and love her children brought, and how nothing could ever fill the silence left behind. Their father, Brian Phillips, described the unshakable dread that hit him only minutes after leaving the party. A father's intuition that something was terribly wrong. One young survivor of the crash, still carrying both physical and emotional scars, told the court, "She ruined my life. I want her to pay." Judge Daniel White addressed Chidester directly. He told her this was not just an accident. It was a crime. He then sentenced her to 25 to 50 years in prison. Because of her age, it is almost certain she will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Through tears, Chidester offered an apology. She said, "I never meant to harm those children or anyone in the accident. The only thing I can say is that I am deeply sorry. But for the grieving families, no words could ever undo the devastation. 2 children were gone forever, dozens of lives were permanently scarred, and a community that had gathered to celebrate joy was left broken by a tragedy that should never have happened." Number 8, Jennifer Crumbley. On November 30th, 2021, Oxford High School in Michigan became the site of one of the deadliest school shootings in the state's history. 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley opened fire with a handgun, killing 4 classmates and injuring 7 others. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the community and the nation. What made this case different was not just the shooting itself, but the role of Ethan's parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley. Prosecutors argued that they ignored multiple warning signs and failed to take even the most basic steps to prevent the attack. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Ethan showed disturbing behavior. Teachers reported violent drawings and alarming notes, including phrases like, "The thoughts won't stop," and "help me." On the very morning of the shooting, school officials met with Jennifer and James to discuss these warnings. Instead of taking their son home or arranging immediate mental health help, they left him at school. Hours later, he carried out the attack. The gun Ethan used, or a 9mm Sig Sauer, had been purchased just days earlier by his father as a so-called Christmas present. Jennifer had even taken her son to a gun range to practice with it. Investigators later discovered that the weapon was left unsecured in their home, making it easily accessible. Jennifer Crumbley's trial in early 2024 was closely watched across the country. The prosecution argued that her failure to act, combined with her role in making the gun available, directly contributed to the deaths of 4 students. The defense claimed she could not have predicted the tragedy and that she did not believe her son was capable of such violence. In February 2024, a jury found Jennifer guilty on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 for each of the students killed. James Crumbley was convicted on the same charges a month later. Both were later sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. During sentencing, families of the victims delivered heartbreaking statements about their children's stolen futures. The judge made it clear that this was not a case about imperfect parenting, but about catastrophic negligence. The parents had been warned, they had seen the signs, and they had chosen not to act. The case of Jennifer Crumbley set a historic precedent. For the first time in the United States, parents were held criminally responsible for a school shooting carried out by their child. It raised difficult questions about parental responsibility, gun safety, and how far accountability should reach when preventable tragedies occur. Unlike the other women on this list, Jennifer Crumbley never laid a hand on a victim. She didn't set a fire, starve a child, or commit a violent act. But what makes her story so disturbing is how much she failed to do. She ignored her son's mental health struggles. She overlooked disturbing drawings and cries for help. She left a gun and ammunition accessible in her home. And on the morning of the Oxford High School shooting, when teachers begged her to intervene, she brushed it aside, and within hours, 4 students were dead. Her case is historic because it's the first time in America that a parent has been criminally convicted for a school shooting carried out by their child. Prosecutors argued, and the jury agreed, that her negligence was so extreme it was criminal. Some will call her evil because her choices paved the way for a massacre. Others will argue she was careless, reckless, but not malicious. That debate is what makes her the perfect case to close this series, not just because of the tragedy, but because it forces us to ask, when does negligence become deadly enough to be called evil? From mothers who turned their homes into prisons of abuse, to a drunk driver who shattered a children's birthday party, to parents whose negligence led to a school massacre, these Michigan cases show us that evil doesn't always come in the form of strangers. Sometimes it's the people closest, the ones meant to protect, whose actions or inactions cause the deepest wounds. The justice system stepped in after lives were already lost. But the scars for families, survivors, and communities will never fully heal. These stories remind us how fragile safety is and how devastating the cost becomes when responsibility is ignored. In the end, what they leave behind is a chilling question. How many of these tragedies could have been prevented if someone had acted sooner? This has been Unforeseen Fates. If these stories gripped you, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more in-depth true crime breakdowns, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice keeps the conversation alive.